You know, the last day is always interesting. You have like 25 ongoing conversations you have to finish. You're running from one session to the next. You don't know if anyone's going to be in your room because half the people went out after the party last night and partied, right? Right? Some of you are laughing, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, my apologies. I was moderating across another place and they wanted to talk too much. But, you know, this is really the most important session of our week in many ways. We keep talking about crisis, compounded crisis, compounding crisis, as if it's kind of somehow on the one hand fatalistic. We can't get out of the crisis mode. On the other hand, for some people, it's a distant problem, someone else's problem, it's not my own. On the other hand, it's a future state which we're trying to avoid, like the climate crisis, even though it's upon us every day. But now, today, we want to talk about the human beings in that crisis, the people, the youth, the migrants, the livelihoods of women and children who are really struggling every day. You're the experts on this matter. I want to hear from each and every one of you. We hope to have a very engaging discussion. And we hope we draw in those people in the hallway who are still having coffee and chatting loudly. So now, as you all know, this is really, the Africa Food Systems Forum has been transiting from food productivity and really focusing on agronomy and seeds and fertilizer. And I think it's a really unique conversation for us to try and move away from some of the agronomy perspective, right, and pure agriculture. And when we start talking about integrated food systems, oftentimes we focus during the Food Systems Summit in 2021 on consumers and consumer behavior. But if you're a consumer who's struggling for food and you're taking whatever food you can find on the run, how do we look at that differently? I think it's a conversation we haven't had enough. I don't think we rely on WFP, in many cases, FAO, for data and statistics. But sometimes those of us who are in those food systems need a bit more granularity. We want to hear more about solutions. We want to hear about how the different programs are effectively impacting the livelihoods of the youth, of the women, and also from a systems perspective, displaced people, internally displaced people in the conflicts within the countries that we are actually talking about or not talking about. Again, I hope the coffee reception outside joins us or finishes, but we'll speak loudly anyway. So without further ado, and again, in the interest of opening a dialogue, you don't really need to hear from me. We want to hear from each of you. So, can I invite to the stage our first panel, Mr. Stanley Samkange? Is that correctly pronounced? We'll work on it together. Okay. Thank you, Stanley. From WFP, as I mentioned, you can take any seat. We have one less panelist this morning. Very pleased to invite Ada Osekwe. Sorry, I'm pronouncing her name. Yes, please clap and tweet and cheer her. Ada is our board member. She's an entrepreneur. She's an investor. And so we really look to hear, again, both from the institutional side and the private sector side of the systems dialogue. And then our third panelist, Mr. Bernard Hein, Regional Director for West and Central Africa for IFAD. Bernard, thank you so much for joining us. How do we fund all of these displaced people? So I am going to join you. Can you see well? This is a kind of a long room. It's okay? Bernard, do you have a microphone? Should we be using these ones, the handhelds? Sound tech team? Okay, you have both options. Great. So what I would propose is each of the panelists, since I have not introduced you fully and properly, you're welcome to make a few comments to introduce yourselves as you wish to this great audience. But I would also like to ask you each a question, as you go through and introduce yourselves. And I will start out with you, Mr. Sandlake. So the World Food Program has extensive experience, I think that's an understatement, in crisis management, crisis response, in logistics, in supply chains, and one of my favorite discussions with the World Food Program in local sourcing of ingredients for all of the food that you distribute. And now how do you see your evolvement, the changes, the pivots, in terms of responding to this compounded crisis that we're in with regard to displaced people, and of course youth in particular, as a catalyst to longer-term sustainable food security? Now that is like a thesis paper in a question, so we'll see how he manages. I didn't write it, but we'll see. I think you can say anything with response to that. Over to you, Stanley.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to be here, and actually I'm very happy to have this question. Maybe let me introduce myself first. I'm Stanley Samkange. I'm the Senior Director for Strategic Partnerships in WFP. I oversee our engagement with international financial institutions, with the African Union, with our sister agencies in Rome, FAO and IFAD, with relations with China, and issues such as the G20. It's a very important question you ask, and I actually want to focus on the aspect related to youth. And I want to make 2 points in particular. The first point, which is really I think the most fundamental point, is that our main objective in crises with respect to youth is to make things as normal as possible for youth. These are people who are in abnormal situations, who are displaced, they are not in normal context. Often they are uprooted from both communities, from social networks, from other things. The biggest challenge and the most important thing, I think, is to actually make life as normal as possible for people in those situations. That's why also, for example, we place such a high emphasis on school meals, including in emergency contexts. Of course, there's the aspect of ensuring that people have adequate food and nutrition, but there's also the aspect of ensuring that they are able to continue with their education, that education is something that is prioritized when people are in these kind of contexts. In school meals, we see that as a contribution, not just as a safety net, but also to help ensure that especially young people are not uprooted or are not disconnected from the education system, which is in the long run their biggest opportunity. That is their future. So anything we can do to ensure that conditions are as normal as possible for people in abnormal situations is really the priority for us. Beyond that, and in terms of what kinds of things you can do, especially with youth and for youth and by youth in those kinds of situations, we should first recognize that this is a broader challenge. It's not just youth who are in refugee, migrant, or displaced situations that this is an issue for. This is a broader issue, even youth in normal situations. How do you help create job opportunities? How do you make agriculture and other things interesting for youth? How do you enable people to unleash their talents, their opportunities? This is a broader challenge for all of us in the development space, but it's even more difficult for people who are displaced, migrants, or refugees. One of the things that we have tried to do is focus on, again, that learning, that education, that training aspect, especially digital skills. So we have in a number of places, I know in Lebanon and several other places in the Middle East, we've tried to focus on supporting people to have access to digital equipment and digital technology on the one hand, but then also to build digital skills. And it's been, I think, reasonably successful. We've done it on a fairly small scale, but I think this is, for me, an area of real opportunity, because the future anyway is digital. So
Can I just ask, because this is, I think, of interest to many people when you say small, so for some of us it might be gigantesque. Can you be a bit, because give us a few numbers. How many youth are we talking about? And if this is working, what would it take to scale it up?
Yeah. I believe the program I'm most familiar with was in Lebanon, where we had, working also, I think, with the World Bank in Lebanon and in Syria, we worked with, I think it was 6,000 youth. It's not insignificant, but still, compared to the scale of the needs, fairly small, and we did it as a pilot to see, does it make sense? Does it make sense to try and build digital skills and opportunities for people, and can you actually link them to job markets? And the thing that is actually quite useful and important about that in this context that we're talking about today is that it's a way of overcoming, well, let's say, some of the borders, the geographic, and the physical constraints that especially youth in conflict, migratory and displaced situations are facing. It matters where you are and what the environment is. In many situations, people are not allowed to work. They're not allowed to work in the places where they are seeking refuge or where they are temporarily located. And so actually being able to provide digital skills and to have a digital connectivity is also a way of overcoming some of these obstacles that may be existing or imposed on people in particular communities.
I'm going to come back to that. This is so interesting. I want the whole, report and analytics and what did they do, how did it work, and how much did it cost. I have like 1,000 questions, but I can't answer them right now. So just hang on to that. We'll come back to it. But you have such a vast vision and mandate for the challenge and the opportunity, and we want to really learn from your experience. But in the meantime, I'm going to go to Ada. Because it's really just fun to hear from everybody, so many different interesting perspectives and experience on such a challenging topic. And Ada is Nigerian, and a lot of people don't talk about Nigeria as a country in a challenge, in a crisis, but in a growth, economic growth, powerhouse of food and policy reform, so many interesting things happening in Nigeria, and yet it is a very huge security challenge as well. We know that, and the pressures, of course, of all the neighboring countries. So, Ada, I think it would be great as a youth advocate, because, by the way, I have a new slogan. Did you hear this, Ada? We're young at heart. I am not youth, but I'm young at heart. I just want you to know. So this is the tagline for our outcome here, is young at heart. So, as a youth advocate, Ada, can you share about innovation and entrepreneurship among refugees and migrants and internally displaced youth, but relative to the agri-food system's specific challenge, and how do you see the impact and the opportunities in that space?
Yeah. No, thanks. Thanks, Vanessa. Yesterday I was in that presidential room where they were talking and having really interesting presentations on Tanzania and the things that were happening. There were this young people who were singing, right? Lovely performance. And what was showing on the back on the screen when some of the youths were singing was just very poignant for me. There was this picture or video of a young woman holding, 2 children and speaking in her language, her local language, saying how, they were displaced, right? There was hunger, and she had to grab the kids she saw playing around and run, right? And flee and move away from the crisis that was developing. And she lost 2 kids in the process. She still can't find them. And my heart just went out, I was just like this just can't keep happening. Not in in the world we live in today, when on the flip side, there's still so much wealth and opportunities. So I look at that, and it's children, young people, that are at the heart of the conflict and being affected in a negative way. And as you look at the refugee crisis, over half of those refugees, the 20 million or so we have in Africa, are people under the age of 18. They are young people. They are the youths we speak about. And I met some of them when I came out here, I think 5 years ago. I went to the Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya. I went with the World Economic Forum at the time, and we spent about a week with the UNHCR hosting us and just visiting and speaking with the young people. I met them. I learned about their dreams, their aspirations. They were all so bright, right? Majority of them were just like, they had the energy, and they just had these big dreams to make a difference in their lives, right? And to get out of the rot, to get out of the cycle of poverty. But ultimately, the ugly side to that is that those dreams are not typically realized. It's untapped opportunity. It's an untapped opportunity and potential, I feel, because you have those teeming youths out there in the camps, bright, they want to do things, but they're constrained. They're constrained by certain laws. You can't get work permits, or people can't employ them, or they're not trained, or they don't have the digital skills and the tools. So it was just compounded. And I'm a private sector person. I've been an entrepreneur for the last 7 years, and my mind is like going, asking questions, asking, okay, what's the size of this market? How do I size this? What's the opportunity? What's the addressable market from an economic standpoint? How can we truly tap into this? How can we attract people who do have the money to come in here and see this as an opportunity to invest and lift folks out, these young people, out of poverty, and truly allow them to realize those dreams and those bright aspirations. At the time, it was 2018, I think the IFC had just brought out their study on Kakuma as a marketplace. So it was the first time we were saying, okay, this is nearly a $50 million market opportunity. And they did a survey. They had about 15% of the businesses in the camp that identified as entrepreneurs. Then when you peel those layers back, and entrepreneurs who maybe own the dukas, the retail stores and things like that, you peel, or the M-Pesa points, you peel that back, and you still found that nearly 50% of the owners were from the host community, were Kenyan, and they typically were not employing the refugees. So it's just layers and layers of things. So you truly have to, I think the first learning there was, how do we keep peeling through the surface of research and the data, and really digging deep by truly asking those right questions. But then it was just, entrepreneurship truly is one of the biggest ways out of this, because they couldn't get the work permits, they can't get employed. So what do? So as I think about it in the agri-food context, there I was thinking, can't we have greenhouses here? I know FAO went on to do some work in that space, setting up greenhouses where there's horticulture projects, because back in that specific area, it's in the Turkana County, so it's quite arid, it's very dry, so it's how do you still utilize greenhouses and proper irrigation. I've been to Israel. I've seen how in dry places they can truly get serious yield from tomatoes or from spinach or whatever. So I felt that was one big opportunity. But one that I really saw was, how do we employ or utilize these refugees and the settlements they're in as a supply of agricultural produce to the marketplace? So how do we link them in the food system? There was a really great example from Uganda, I think the Bidi settlement, where I think it's Afia Porridge. Some of you may have heard of them. It's a social impact enterprise. And they were employing young women in the refugee camps to grow mushrooms and millet and sorghum, and sourcing from them to add to their high nutrient porridge product that they then went on to use to give pregnant women. I think about 100 pregnant women, 1,000 kilograms of produce was sourced from the refugees, and giving this high nutrient dense porridge to truly help their immunity and transform issues around malnutrition. So for me, that's just a clear example, right? Your supply of agricultural produce potentially coming from the refugees and linking it to markets, linking it to jobs. Don't just train them, link it to jobs. I keep saying training is not jobs. We talk about training so much, but it's at the end of the day, link it to jobs. And then the second thing I'll think of, I have a chain of farm-to-table restaurants back in Nigeria. We source from farmers, and we add value in the form of juices, our food. We have cassava waffles, for example, because we grow 40 million metric tons of cassava in Nigeria, but we don't add value to it. So we're using the flour, we use fonio, things like that.
Can you do those frozen? I think I need some in my house. Isn't that cassava waffles?
So for me, a second thing I'll think of around, potentially franchising existing businesses that have already been proven. Because we talk entrepreneurship for young people, but there's still a high failure rate when it comes to entrepreneurship. So I know there's mentorship around it, I know there's potentially training, but sometimes the business model just was never going to work, or the market environment was just not going to be as suitable for that business or at the time. So how do we take models that have worked, that are operational, that have proven their business model, and then scale them in these settlements, providing them the entire structure of the business? And we're doing that at Newly, not with refugees yet in West Africa, but I'll talk about that maybe later in the conversation. But those are just two things I can think of in the agri-food context as we think about engaging young people in these settlements. Thanks.
Wow, I have like 101 more questions and ideas, and I hope you're all busy keeping notes, tweeting your suggestions and ideas, arguing with us virtually, because that's the only way you can talk right now, because I hold the mic, so just go for it. But Bernard, I don't know if I should use a French accent for your name, but it's more interesting. Bernard Hein is the Regional Director of West and Central Africa for IFAD. IFAD is a mystery to a lot of people. So can you break this down, in practical terms? Because ADA has given us so many ideas: incubators, startups, social entrepreneurship in refugee camps, taking digitalization, getting to markets. Can you build on the other two speakers' great input and ideas, and give us a little bit? IFAD's also always evolving, and we appreciate with President Hongbo's leadership as well, how many different innovations you've been doing also in the climate space, which may be reducing the longer term potential tidal waves, right, of youth refugees. So just give us some of your ideas around the agri-food space, because you're financing and funding food and ag across Africa, and how do you see some innovations, some light at the end of this really, really grueling tunnel that we're all talking about, which is constant growing, compounding crises? Over to you.
Thank you very much. Actually, I was in a previous session and I was saying that we are not talking enough about fragility in this AGRF, whereas the transformation we are talking about is happening, in mostly fragile contexts. And I was happy when you were introducing this session, when you mentioned that actually this is one of the most important sessions because of the crisis we are talking about, and crisis is also a determinant of fragility. So it's really important. I concur with you, and I'm going to perhaps address your point with a regional perspective, the West and Central Africa region. Starting with what is the scope of what we are talking about. When we are saying migrant, we are saying refugees, we are saying internally displaced people, what it is about. Only last year, 11 million people were concerned by displacement in West and Central Africa. This represents about 10% of the population. When you look at the internally displaced people, there were about 8 million people. When you look at the refugees, there were about 2 million. You take a country like Burkina Faso, Burkina Faso, 3 years ago, you had in our, as per our assessment, because we are having operation, we had about 50,000 people who were internally displaced. That was 3 years ago. And recently, when we checked this, it was over 2 million people as a result, of the conflict, the crisis going on. 3,000 schools closed. 600,000 kids out of school without future. You look at Nigeria, same thing. As a result of the insurgency of Boko Haram, over 3 million people internally displaced. So this is what we are talking about here. So they are extremely vulnerable, and that's why IFAD, as per its mandate, we are trying to really include them, to involve them in our work, in our program of work. Now, concretely, what we are doing, we started, you mentioned President Humbo, who was very, very, very concerned by the topic. So we started reframing a little bit, even at the corporate level, the way we address the matter. So we came up with this youth action plan to sort of create the framework for us to tailor the operations, to tailor the way we target those youth in our project design. So this was the first thing we did. And after this, we made sure that actually the organization, to translate this into action, we committed ourselves during the period 2020 to 2024 to actually target to have youth-sensitive projects in 60% of our operations. And this includes internally displaced youth, it includes migrants, it includes refugees. So this is an organizational step we made to it. Now, concretely on the ground, when we are implementing, what do we do about it? We use a youth sensitivity lens to make sure that the challenges they are facing, for example, we are here talking about internally displaced migrants and so on. In addition to the existing challenges in the host community, they face additional challenges, for example, the access, to land, the skills, the capacity they do not have, the access to finance, many things. So to address these challenges, so what we do in those operations, we make sure that, for example, vocational training, is part of it, trying to address, their need. We make sure that all the needs in terms of access to services, to finance, is provided. And basically, this is helping them. She was saying that it's not just about training, it's also about linking the training to job. So we make sure that you will not get this job if you do not have access to the finance. So these are the things we are trying to cover under our operation, and to also make sure that mentorship is provided, because from experience, you will just train, you will provide the financing. If the mentorship is not there to make the business viable, after 3 years, it will go down. This is our experience. So to us, business development, entrepreneurship is the way to it, and not only for normal youth, but also for the migrant, the internally displaced people.
You mentioned this 2024, action plan for youth, right? And 60% youth sensitivity. I mean, I kind of get nervous when I hear gender sensitivity. I don't know if I'm included, because, is it for me or is it not for me, right? So how much funding changed? Can you give us some numbers? Are you even close to reaching that 60% mark? Did you really change the nature of the programs?
Definitely, when we say 60% youth sensitive, which means that we have a number of criteria. For example, when a project is being designed, so how much financing in that project is being allocated to youth sensitive activities, you see. But we even went further. We went further to say, okay, to have what we call now the second generation of youth project. You are talking about incubation. Now we are designing projects by the youth, for the youth. You see.
Now we're talking. Now we're talking, right? Okay, this is getting serious.
An example I will give to you is in Cameroon, where we have this youth entrepreneurship program, agro-pastoral youth entrepreneurship program, where we brought together 100 youth representative of the 10 provinces of Cameroon, who reflected with head of agencies, with senior government officials, discussing what are the challenges, what is preventing them to engage, in food system. Based on this, we move ahead to take their challenges and to transform this into a project designed by themselves. We put $60 million on this project. It's taking them with NGOs on the ground, assessing the ideation, the idea generation with the youth, selecting them, putting them into the incubation process. And 12 incubators were established. What we've done also here is that when we discussed with the youth, one of the challenges was that the training were just technical training. It was not business-oriented. So we also developed the capacities of those incubation centers to add the business orientation, and those youth, when they enter these centers with their project idea, they are able to mature it, to get exposed to real business situation, and then they are connected to microfinance institutions, and they start implementing their business with the support of business advisors for 1 to 3 years. So this is what, for example, we are doing specifically.
Great. Wonderful. I say great because, for those of us who have been in this kind of training mode, we know that the training sometimes just doesn't go anywhere. And you could spend all your money training and then nothing happens. You don't have jobs, you don't have employment, you don't have entrepreneurs, you certainly don't have profitability. So, I'm happy to hear you talking about business advisors and kind of follow-on mentorship. And the data has actually shown that if you compound training with mentorship and networking, right? Because then you can have mentorship and still be in your same circle. But when you grow the network, that's when the business opportunities really start to have fruition. But I want to come back to
if you allow, training mentorship alone is not enough. When you train, before even mentoring, you have to allow the business to start. From experience, when you train and you do not provide the access to the finance for the business to start, within 1 year, your survival rate become around 10 to 15% of the idea. However, if you are able to make this connection with the finance, and then now to add the mentorship, quickly you can go up to 60, 75% of survival.
I love formulas. You guys all got that, right? The return on investment of adding the access to finance, then followed by the mentorship, 60 to 70%. That's better than in the US, I'm just saying. We have to talk about this. Okay, so Stanlake, World Food Program has this innovation, digitization hub that I've heard about and talked to, World Food Program is also committed to local procurement, and yet you have this, what we hear about all the time, not enough funding just to feed people that are in the network who are displaced. So how do you balance between innovating, local sourcing, and then again the epic growing compounded crises that you're managing? And can you just give us some of your formulas? Because let's go away from here and say, okay, what's actionable? What can we take away from your experience? How do we partner better? Which is what we're here about, right? The Food Systems Forum is about partnership. So if anyone in the room wants to partner with you, what are the opportunities for them as well?
Most people know WFP as a big humanitarian organization, largest humanitarian organization in the world. What they don't know is that when WFP was created in 1961, for the first 20 years of our existence, we were focused on development. Until the early 80s, 90% of WFP's work was on development. That started to change with the Ethiopia famine when we got brought in, and through the 1980s there were a series of natural and human-made disasters that engaged us more and more to support responses. By the end of the 1990s, WFP was 90% focused on emergencies. It had entirely flipped. Since then, the pendulum has moved back a little bit, and we've actively tried to move the pendulum back towards a better balance. Today, out of, let's say, operations of about 10 billion a year, 2/3 of that is still focused on direct, immediate life saving, things that are needed to keep people alive. That's 2/3 of our program of work. But 1/3 of our program of work is focused on longer-term resilience and on addressing the root causes. You know? And this increasingly, as crises have grown, as the numbers have increased, actually the only way to bring down these big humanitarian numbers is to invest more and to focus more on the resilience and the root causes. Otherwise, these humanitarian numbers will just continue to increase, and it's unsustainable. So we have tried actively to focus not just on the saving lives, which has to be done, but on the ways to mitigate crises when they are occurring, and on the things that you can do in the middle of a crisis to help move people towards longer term and better situations and circumstances. And that is very much a focus of our work. We were discussing earlier with one of the ministers in Tanzania, engagement on livelihoods. For us, jobs are critical. If people don't have jobs, they can't be food secure. So that's why we are very focused on what can you do to help create jobs. How do we as WFP use our big footprint, local procurement, other types of things to create jobs and growth and employment. Local procurement, our board allows us to pay 20% more than international prices if we can buy locally, if we can procure locally. In Africa, we buy over $500 million a year locally in Africa. We try and buy that as much as possible from smallholders. I believe here in Tanzania, we normally procure about 50 million a year from dollars a year from Tanzanian farmers. 25% of that is from smallholder farmers directly. But we do it in a way that's not just designed to procure, but that's designed to create jobs and employment and value all along the value chain. So we're not just a commercial buyer. No, we are a development buyer in that sense. But I want to go back to, and in this context, of course, we do try and look for opportunities for local jobs, local production, especially for youth. Employment, entrepreneurship, encouraging creativity, wherever this is possible, we do invest in that.
So I get to be the tough guy for a minute, because here I am representing AGRA and our partnership here. And shouldn't WFP be one of our core partners of this forum? Don't you all think that would be an obvious partnership for a partnership guy? I'm just putting you on the spot. But
We're here.
We're here. Showing up is half the battle. That took us a couple years. Next is, staying here. So, but, the numbers in Tanzania. So I work with WFP very closely on the Farm to Market Alliance. I'm actually on the steering committee with, JP, and we see the WFP local procurement opportunities, right? Do any of you know how much maize Tanzania produces? Do you? There's got to be a Tanzanian ag person in the room. It's between 3 to 5 million tons a year, right? And they can double that with more market. Easily. Huh? Easily.
In dollar term?
In dollar terms, please, tell me.
No, I'm just asking.
Well, if you just take your average $300 a ton, which it's not right now, it's closer to $400 a ton, you can do the math, right? So 300, you guys are the mathematicians. I'm supposed to be. It's it's a $1 billion industry, right? So I'm just saying, we need to get that equation moving in a way which, we don't want to have refugees who need this food, but we don't want to create new refugees also, because the ones who are growing food can't actually find markets and sell it. So there's an equation here that's just the Tanzania model. I worked on this with your team also in Ethiopia. Ethiopia went from producing only about 1 million tons of maize to now being one of the largest producers on the continent, with Nigeria, of course, 5 million tons of maize in Ethiopia. And one year we did supply 50,000 tons to WFP out of 3 million tons. So there's more work that we need to do on figuring out those market structures and supply and demand, so that we get the numbers to work. And the youth employment, as you all know, is exactly where we want to go. Just growing food isn't going to be enough. That's not where anybody wants to stay.
Yeah. But most of that production is for local consumption. So, and we are very careful when we buy. We are not allowed to distort markets. We don't want to go into the market and raise prices for everybody. So we buy when there are surpluses, and we've been working with the government of Tanzania, in fact, to be able to procure more, because our needs are much bigger. But there are constraints that go beyond what's been produced. What we were discussing with the minister earlier today, and what we're working with the government of Tanzania on, is also the supply chain. Actually, he was complaining that their sardines and other commodities rotting because they can't be moved, and the marketing is really a critical part, and this is a big part of what WFP also does and contributes, and that's how you link the smallholder farmers to the broader opportunities. The reasons it's called Farmers to Market Alliance is that people can produce, but then where is the market? And unless you focus on that market and the things that are needed to enable people to get the benefit of what they are producing, including value addition, you're not going to make progress.
That's just like a segue, like you could never want a better segue to Ada, right? You're talking about the entrepreneurs, the market opportunities, and how do we foster more youth entrepreneurs, whether it be in refugee camps or internally displaced people, or at the root cause level, like Bernard was saying, so that the underlying dynamics in the markets actually encourage people to want to stay, right? And or go back if they have to leave and come back home. So, what have you seen, Ada, and in your view, what are the numbers? Bernard is talking about finance, access to finance, and we know how costly that can be for small businesses and how inaccessible commercial loans are for many people. By the way, there's a new study we just released, and hopefully we can share it with all of you, where we surveyed SMEs, 1,600 SMEs across the continent over the last couple months about the effect of the compounded crisis on their financials and the fragility, the liquidity issues, and the constraints that they've encountered. And so that maybe can come as an input to this discussion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, the youth continue to be the driver of growth for our economies, to take us out of the crisis. We really have to focus on youth. But I'll go a layer deeper again and bring out issues around women and girls within that demographic as well. Because women truly are the foundation of our food security. 75% of the labor force in ag, 80% of production of what actually comes out. But then you look at the end of the day, the aspects of the business side of agriculture, where truly that's where the wealth creation lies. And they're nowhere to be found. We're completely left out. So I feel like we can't have this conversation without talking about women. According to the UNHCR, women and girls account for half of those refugees. So let's go deeper on that. And when we do, specifically on the ag side, 18%, they earn 18% less than men in the farming space. 6 times less capital when it comes to financing. six times less likely, rather, to get financing than men. So we don't even have the money to build those businesses. I'm a female entrepreneur in the ag space, and I know how difficult, even with my background in finance, MBA, whatever, in ag, it's still so tough to have those conversations. The biases are real. They exist. I've experienced it. So we really need to be very intentional about our focus on women. We have to be so deliberate. And I have no apologies. One of the projects we are designing, we actually launched last year, and we have funding from a large foundation, is back to that point on franchising I raised earlier on. We've been doing our business for 7 years. We've scaled out our farm-to-table cafes. So I was like, we keep getting requests, can we get a franchise? Can we actually pay you to take your model and set it up somewhere else that you're not, so that we can make money out of it? And I was like, I want to design this, but I want to do it in an intentional way. So how do I get young women, only women, to apply, not guys, to be owners of my type of business that already has the playbook, and I'll layer it on with mentorship. I'll layer it on with training. For the first 6 months, they only train. Then they get the funding as a 0% grant, repayable, so they have the discipline to pay back, and it's not some sort of moral hazard that you see so much in the donor community. Oh, let's just give them money. And then what do they do with it? We have to start looking at, really looking at the financing structures and the architecture around donor funding towards young people. And then they set up the business, they get started before the mentorship comes. You start seeing, they start putting into practice the training they got on business skills, on P&Ls, on accounts, while you're still there watching them, and then the mentors come in. Hey, how did you do today? How did you market? Where did you, source from? Are you having any issues with getting supplies of the pineapples you need for that juice? How have you thought about it? Go back to the drawing board. But they're actually hands-on, roll up your sleeves, putting things into practice. Not just training and then saying, how are we going to link to the job later on? It's a closed-loop system. And at the end of the day, they get ownership of that business. Let's talk about ownership. Let's talk about equity. They own that, and they can use that as collateral down the line. So that at the end of the day, it's not just about jobs. It's about safe jobs. It's about dignified jobs. It's about stable jobs. And on my final point on stability, and I want to truly stress it, we talk about unemployment rates amongst youth in Africa. At the end of the day, it's still about 10, at least according to the data, 10.6% unemployment. It's still lower than the global youth average of about 13%. But when you then pull back the layers, we have 79%, according to the ILO, International Labour Organization, 79% vulnerable employment. Self-employed. Oh, my family member gave me a job. No stable wages. It's not recorded. It's not in the formal economy. So we need to look at the kinds of jobs. At the end of the day, when we do the training and we link them up, entrepreneurship, not just for the sake of entrepreneurship. It has to be stable. It has to be safe. And it has to be dignified. Thanks.
Wow. So much to think about, peeling layers back, and we have a whole nother panel. So Bernard, you get the last word on this panel, and we're going to move to our next panel really quickly. And in the meantime, as the other panel comes up, we might switch things around and get some audience questions before that. But Bernard, again, just last word. You've heard all of this interesting ideas and some challenges, and you've been in the landscape probably longer than any of us, seeing different things. And I think Ada's point is something you expressed, right? Using the funding that's available in an effective way, right? And in a way which catalyzes change. Because we're tired. Aren't we tired? We're tired of talking about these things in a very depressing and, you know, overwhelming statistics going in the wrong direction. So give us some energy, give us some solutions. Let's wrap this panel up with some lessons from the way forward.
Yeah, perhaps the energy will come from, a quick, example or best practices, that would come in mind. But if I can build quickly on what she just mentioned, she was talking about, the jobs, they have to be, stable and so on. It's indeed very important. I'm going to use the word decent jobs. This is important, and that's why when we are working on entrepreneurship development, business development in agriculture, there is a dimension that we should never forget, the policy aspect. As we are supporting business development, how are we ensuring that, the policy environment is also favorable for those jobs, for the business to flourish? We did this in one of the countries where we're trying to launch, actually, to promote youth-led businesses in the agri-value chains. And then we realized that, the policy environment, there was actually nothing, specific to agriculture. So we partnered with ILO to actually do a 1-year-long work to establish this framework to allow that, so that in 3-5 years terms, the businesses we are promoting were going to be able to flourish. So it's very
Okay,
important.
let's take that study and use it for other countries. So we have like 4 documents we have to share out of this, but we want that one. Okay.
In terms of quick examples, I would say what comes to my mind, I was in a country where we promoted actually 5,000 youth-led businesses. And one of them that came to my mind when I see, youth in poultry with 5,000, with contract with the Hilton Hotel, providing the Hilton Hotel with chickens. I see, another group of youth, technology. Yesterday, the minister of the UAE was talking about technology. And she was saying, actually, she preferred to use the term agro-technologies, which is so true. Seeing youth, actually, from the rural house, they are able to activate using their phone, a system, an irrigation system, to water their vegetable. This is something, a success I've seen in our project. And also going on Facebook themselves, we used to establish those information system, to allow marketing of agri-products. Those youths, they don't care about this anymore. They go on Facebook, they market their own produce, and seeing them, having contract with big supermarkets like Carrefour and so on. This is a good practice. I was a month ago in Benin, and then we were visiting a district where we supported the development of lands for rice production, and the entire value chain, the way it was set up by youth, it was just amazing, with the latest technologies and a firm contract with server. And I told the president of Benin, we're just going to tweet from here that the rice you might be eating on Air France is produced by youth in a NIFAD, in a NIFAD funding project. So a firm contract, they are producing, processing, packaging, selling, to server, and is being cooked for Air France. These are examples.
Brilliant. Thank you so much to this panel, and really this everything from policy to practical examples and a few challenges to take us moving forward. So please give them a huge round of applause. And we're out of time for the Q&A, but what I suggest is that you go run and get their cards and follow them in the hallways.
So now we want to hear from some cooperatives. So we have Mr. Kaitare Shema from the cooperative Kodiga Cooperative. Are you here? No, I'm not seeing him. And Alice Zamushkosha. Another, no? Oh, okay. We might go back and do more Q&A then. And Anthony Mahangama. Thank you. All right, great. Well, at least you might get all the questions. Thank you for joining us. and he's program manager at IUCN. And Mahdi Hassan. Wonderful. Please come and join us. Excellent. So, wow, you have a whole committee of clan of supporters. So great. This is going to be energetic. Now, if any of our other speakers felt like they should come back on stage, you're welcome. But we're just going to dive in here. Now, this is going to be interesting. This is a whole different look. Let's hear about each of your endeavors. And IUCN, of course, does everybody know what IUCN is? You're going to have to help us out because this is, one of our board members told me that we should stop producing reports that have 4 pages of acronyms at the foreword of the report. So IUCN is on the 4 pages of acronyms that requires an explanation. But really what we want to hear from you in particular is how you work with refugees, migrants in the food systems context, because everybody's had to rethink, I think, over the past few years as we challenge ourselves towards realizing that, this food systems contributes 35% at least, if not more, to climate change. So we can't just keep doing the same old things, right? So in addition to the crises that we've been challenging ourselves with, and we have refugees and youth migrants, you must have had to pivot some of the things that you're doing, and this is what we really want to hear. What's innovative? And Anthony, we hope that you're going to challenge us with some of the scale of the challenges that you see every day. Is the mic on? You want this one? You can start.
I will use this one. Yeah. Thank you so much. Good morning. So my name's, as moderator has introduced, Anthony Mhagama, and I work with IUCN. IUCN is the International Union for Conservation of Nature. It's actually a global network of conservation organizations, of government, civil society organizations, non-government organizations. So these are some of members of IUCN. IUCN has got a number of scientific commissions that works in various areas of interest. And for the moment, we have around 7 commissions, and we also do operate across regions and countries through what we call secretariat, and these are particularly experts working in a number of environmental issues, be it ecosystem conservation, biodiversity conservation, and many other areas of interest in that space. So far we do have 1,400 members globally, and I represent the Tanzania office, which is part of the East African Regional Office, which is based in Nairobi. So speaking of migration and youth and refugees, I think this is quite an important topic, as previous speakers had underlined. And the IUCN's Commission for Environment and Economic and Social Policy estimates that migration will keep on increasing. So the problem that we are seeing now, the magnitude will keep on increasing if we really don't take measures to address the challenge. But many times when we talk about migration, when we talk about food systems, when we talk about food security, we mainly refer to we as people. We often forget other creatures, other species that we do coexist in the earth that we are living. And I'm saying this because IUCN is also monitoring through what we call the red list a number of species. Currently, the red list has got something around 150,000 species that are being monitored. And out of that, approximately 30% they are being threatened of extinction. So these are some of the issues that are actually being accelerated by widespread land degradation and also climate change. So whenever we talk about food systems, we need to think of other species that we do coexist. And in terms of our experience working with the refugees, I have some few examples where we really have seen that this group is actually also very key if we are to transition to sustainable food systems, if we are to regenerate, if we are to repair the damage that has already been done on environment, on ecosystems, and on biodiversity. So we had worked in Bangladesh, in Rohingya refugees community. We had worked with the UNHCR, and there we had worked with communities to address human-elephants conflicts. They were actually widespread, and therefore through integration and working with refugees and also host communities, through that program we were really able to develop some of the local-led solutions that could help scare and that could help push away the elephants. And in the end, we actually had the ecosystem that has very less elephant raiding incidences. And in that way, we see that it's essential that refugees, youth, migrants are also taken as integral part of whatever solutions and policies that we are devising, especially when it comes to integrated natural resources management. We also had some interactions in
This is your last example, right?
Sure, yes. So in another example, we had worked with the forest management, and this is in western parts of Kenya, where we are seeing communities and also refugees can really be part of and practice sound forest management practices. And this helped quite a lot in ensuring that those forests and natural ecosystems that surround refugees and also the communities could actually keep their viability in terms of producing and also supplying the vital ecosystem services that are required in those locations. And this includes such services as water purification, but preservation and also conservation of water catchment areas, as well as other vital species that do survive within the forests. As we understand that whenever a refugee is being, for example, when we are setting up new camps, there is quite a lot of degradation that can potentially happen in those areas in terms of wood that is required for cooking, for energy, as well as construction materials and also for daily subsistence. So what we see overall is that refugees, youth, and other migrants are quite essential when it comes to the nexus between especially agriculture, food systems, and conservation of the natural environment. Thank you.
Wow. Did you guys get all that? That's really complex, right? The forest, the youth, the migrants, the biodiversity, the water requirements, and all how are challenging each other. And that's such a real reality. I don't think, we talked about Cameroon earlier, but Bernard, I'm sure, could give many examples in Cameroon as well as the one you gave in Kenya of how the forests are being threatened by the population needs for water, for firewood, for, you know, not to mention the lack of productivity of the land under cultivation, which is really the biggest challenge across the continent, because people keep saying we're going to expand land under cultivation rather than talking about better utilization of the resources that we have. But that's not easy, as you've described. I'm sure it's extremely challenging.
Yeah.
And I also want the numbers. Well, if you have another report, we're going to create a database out of this, right? Because we want to know more. How do we use this information? But let's turn our mind. You mentioned Bangladesh, and wow, we have a Bangladeshi. Did you do that on purpose? I did. He must have planned this. Because I didn't even realize you were going to talk about Bangladesh, and we didn't even know we were talking about Asia. This is very exciting. So please, you know, we always say that the Africa Food Systems Forum is not just African. There's some over 100 countries actually participating this week, and we constantly want to learn from best practices around the world. Who says progress should be linear? Who says we should reinvent things? So what are we missing? How can you really bring some of your experience? And you're a youth champion, so we want to know what it's really like, because we all like young at heart is nice. I'm trying, but really I'm not there yet, and I'm trying to go back in time. So tell us what it's like to be a youth champion, and what you've seen, and what's your vision for how we can learn to do more in this space. Thanks.
Thank you, Vanessa. Hello, everyone. I am Mehdi Hassan Tushar, and yes, I am from Bangladesh. And here, I am an agriculturist, and here, first of all, I am an engine ambassador. And engine stands for Next Generation Agricultural Impact Network. It's a global organization which works for engaging the youth in agriculture by connecting the different continents at one platform, and to create a sustainable future for the agriculture. And the objectives of Engine is to create a global network to meet the need of next generation agricultural leaders, agriculturists, farmers, and the youth who are related to the agriculture and agri-entrepreneurships. And for that, Engine are providing a lot of skills and opening a lot of platform for the youth to work with and to empower themselves, like they're arranging impact and gender training, exchange programs around the world, research and data sharing from what the youth can get the information which is going on to the world, and provide a platform where you can share your experience. You can apply your ideas to the agricultural field to change the future of agriculture, and the most importantly, mentorship. They are connecting the youth with some global mentors who already have the experience of working in the floor of agriculture. They know everything, and the youth can get the experience from them, and they can create themselves like this of their mentors. So this is the introduction of my my organization that I work for, Engine, and I also work for another youth organization that is called YASH, that means International Association of Students in Agricultural and Related Science, which is branching through 50 plus countries and connecting more than 150 agricultural university students at same platform, where we can meet the different type of agricultural students around the world, and we can know their expertise, and we can also learn a lot of things from them. And the main impact for this year is to creating a platform where the rural farmer can meet the young agriculturist, and they can be benefited from them, and the youth agriculturist also can learn the root level things from the rural farmers. And I work as a regional external relation coordinator in YASH Asia Pacific, and the no food waste coordinator in the YASH world. And these are some of my works for the youth organization. And you have asked for the role of youth. Yeah, for me, youth are the base of the world. And the youth are the only one who can reach the minimum level to the maximum level of almost everything with the same energy and the same enthusiasm. So for me, youth are the best champion. And they can ensure the food security. They can ensure the nutritional security for their community, for their continent, for their region. And they can become agri-entrepreneur. They can bring some changes, some innovation and technology to the field of agriculture to meet the future food demand for the world. And they can connect the world through a same platform with different kind of agricultural organization and companies. So, and the main thing is the youth can take the challenge to take one step ahead with a limited economical support. That is the main thing. So for me, youth is the best change maker in the food security field. Thank you.
You got all that, right? Wow. Woo. I kind of now feel like we have to hear from everybody in the room. But you know, one of the things which we all think about is what governments can do, right? And we're relying on the voice of the youth to better clarify and specify what governments can actually do. Because you say limited economic support, and I think that's really key. We talk about big programs which require a huge amount of funding, but sometimes it's really a small amount which is targeted in the right way, which can go for better school feeding programs, right, which are more diversified, more nutritious food, or things we haven't even imagined yet. What I would love to do is actually suggest that we welcome Bernard and Sam Lake back on the stage. And we just lost Ada, unfortunately. But I would like to open this up a bit and hear from the audience and be able to ask a couple questions, because they say nothing with us without us, nothing for us without us, right? And we have a great youth audience, which we don't get too often. So if you don't mind, just join us up here. Bernard, you can come back. And I was going to give my seat to Ada, but she's not even here. But let's just do a rapid fire questions and hear from each of you, and then we can get some quick responses from the panel. So do we have a microphone for, who has some questions for, right, I knew it. You know, let's hear from you while the mic is coming. It's okay, we can hear you. With only, there you go, there you go.
Yeah, maybe for the online, oh yeah. Okay. My name is Akira. I'm also part of Engine with Tushar. And I'm an agriculture engineer working with digital solutions for smallholder farmers. And about the refugee crisis, most of them, they happen in fragile areas, just like as Bernard mentioned, and fragile areas for the political environment, but mostly for the climate shocks. And what for me it's my key question. It's like they are displaced. They are not in their comfort zone. Most of them they have language barriers. So sometimes even for business, I can see like I'm Brazilian. I live in France, and it's really complicated sometimes even to. I already speak French. Fluently, but I still face some challenges. So is agriculture a good way of having these business opportunities that, because of the language barriers, because it's the agricultural products, and how can we, how can I say, avoid those climate shocks, because most of those areas, they are desertic, or they have lack of water resources, energy, and what IFAD or other organizations have been doing to avoid this kind of lacks. Thank you.
Wonderful. Let's take a couple more questions. Now we've got the hands flying. And if Ada shows back up, I'll give her my seat. And let's hear, now this is about digital and climate change for the previous question. Go ahead, please introduce yourself, stand up. Apparently we have an online audience. I hope there's thousands of people around the world listening.
I'm Nima from the World Food Program. My question is, this is specifically actually for Tanzania. When we're talking about employment for the refugees, government feels like, you know, this kind of incentives will make the refugees not going back. So the government has been quite very strict in terms of providing this kind of incentive for refugees to be able to really feed themselves. So I'm just wondering, what would be the role of development partners, the international communities, really, when it comes to how do you support, because if they can do a few small businesses just within the area, if they can produce, it means even less burden to donors. So what could be the role of the international community for government that have been quite very strict? Thank you.
Super question. I love it. Let's hear from you in the back here. The question about legality of work for refugees and then the food security angle, please.
Hi, I'm Nana from IFAD, and mine is more of a thought and a contribution. And I think Bernard was also speaking about employment and entrepreneurial opportunities for young people. And at IFAD also we have a youth integrated agri-hub program which really focuses on a mutually supportive function of an ecosystem that brings together private partners as well as, building the confidence and the know-how and the technological, know-how of the young people. And in a recent dialogue that we've had with young people, we realized that a lot of young people are really just interested in having a job. And training alone, like we've all heard here, is not enough. So how do we build this mutually inclusive ecosystem framework that young people can really thrive? Because from this hub initiative that we have within IFAD, it's currently in 9 African countries. So the idea is really to train youth through an incubation hubs that we have across 9 countries in Africa and really linking them to employment opportunities, because most of them want a wage job like you and I. Not all of us want to be entrepreneurs. Not all of us want to be farmers. There are people that actually want a decent employment, of a wage employment. So that's what the model is really focused on, and really building that private sector partnership with, civil society organizations and with NGOs, etc., all to create that employment opportunity for job. And now there is the aspect of technology and also green jobs, but young people are very interested. We are innovative and we want opportunities that will, just a job like, yourself and I. So that's the contribution that I wanted to also bring to the table. And it's not just about having that entrepreneurship spirit, but also focusing on the wage aspect and dimension, which this program is really focused on. Thanks.
Wow, Bernard, you're gonna have to, leave your seat for Nana in a year or two. She's amazing. Okay, so let's hear from you back here, and you can introduce yourself quickly. You can stand up, speak clearly. And by the way, this panel is going to have to answer all the questions with one rapid round, but sometimes they say the questions are more important than the answers, so let's hear it.
Good morning. I'm Patrick Wattens from Uganda, and I lead Liberation Community Finance, a local microfinance dealing with the agricultural value chain. The country I come from, Uganda, hosts the largest community of refugees in the world, and the largest population of refugees in the entire world is seated in Uganda. And one settlement called Bidibidi has the single largest concentration of refugees of approximately 250,000 people, or refugees. Now, we have had challenges on food, because when you have approximately 1.5 million people or slightly above in these rural communities who have also not been self-sufficient in terms of food, there's pressure on the community. There is an emerging conflict between the communities and the refugees. Of course, with a lot of support from international agencies, the locals feel that the refugees are treated preferentially. So what I want to know the experience from the panel of what has been the experience in integrating refugees into the rural ecosystems in these rural refugee hosting communities, and how has it been able to also integrate them to contribute to the food value chains so that they are able to serve themselves in the same communities with the hosting communities, and how have they been able to be integrated in the financial sector inclusively?
I hope that we have our note takers. Normally we have note takers in these sessions. I have no idea who's taking notes, but the questions are really, really interesting and robust. So I know you have the mic. Oh, let's hear from you, and then yourself and yourself. Wow, you can answer 10 questions in one response, right? Okay, great.
Yeah, okay, so I'm Abdul Kabir, and I'm a Next-Gen Ag and Park Network Ambassador, just like Mr. Tushar. I'm really impressed by the thoughts that were shared on the panel today. And particularly, I heard that it was really about how financing businesses alone was not enough, and it was important to create enabling environment and policies for these businesses to thrive. So I'm interested in knowing exactly how, in your own capacity, are you lobbying for these policies to be, created and included, or what strategies do you currently have in place, or would you propose to really get these policies, structured to create the enabling environment you described? Thank you.
Well, I'm pretty sure that the closing remarks are going to address that question. Now, right here, yeah. You're going to have to jump up and grab the mic because we're going to have run out of time.
Good morning. My name's Courtney. I'm from New Zealand and I'm also one of our engine ambassadors, and I'll keep my question really brief. Just want to acknowledge everyone, all the panelists and the moderator for their time this morning. My question is around data collection, especially in migrant and refugee workers, often people who are less accessible. They're in rural and more isolated communities. We had a few statistics this morning, and I just wanted to know, how can we go about getting more accurate statistics? How can we make sure that all of these communities are better represented? And do we see any sort of deviation or error from the statistics that are available? What do we think is a more accurate representation of the data that we've got out there at the moment? Thank you.
I love that question. I always wonder, and Ada talked about peeling back the numbers, and I think you can work with Ada on that as well. So let's hear your question. She's 2 mics, but 2 questions on the back side here. Great. And then one in the row behind her. Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm also an engine ambassador. I'm Josie and I'm from Australia. I really agree that we've talked a lot about opportunity and entrepreneurship, as one of the other ladies said. But for me, there's a level that I feel like we're not touching, and whether or not it's a touchy topic in itself, and that is the exploitation of women, youth and refugees in agriculture and our global supply chain. We have organisations committed to their CSR goals and mitigating modern slavery. And we talked about decent or stable work. So I wanted to know, how are we empowering base level workers or refugees or youth or women in agriculture so they can consciously identify decent work? What does that look like here? And how can we empower them to also leave in decent work? And also train the entrepreneurs that are coming up so that they're not continuing to facilitate the cycle that may be accidental modern slavery again.
Modern slavery. This is I went with my mother and my daughter. Have you seen this film that just came out? What's it called? About child trafficking. It's really phenomenal. Because, sorry? The Voice of Freedom? The Voice of Freedom, something like that, yeah. Because I really agree with you. It's a subject we don't want to talk about. It's in front of people. People know about it. Anyway, look it up. It's really profound. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you very much. And compliments, amazing session. Sander Wex, also involved in Engine, but a lot of hats, I for nature, but I have the privilege to work as an officer in the Dutch army. And within the European and NATO context, we are working on getting deployed camps more sustainable, trying to create, especially from the Dutch perspective and European, to create a legacy where you put in deployed camps. There's maybe an easy answer, but also a difficult one. But is there a possibility that if we take out the silo sheds to see how we can combine making food security kind of elements, energy, etc., in a deployed camp, leaving a legacy whilst working with the local stakeholders from, maybe it's difficult, UN, NATO, and these kind of fora, but I think there's a lot of potential there if we pull out the walls between them.
Yeah, let's break those silos down. Okay, yours is the last question, my dear. So jump up, grab the mic, right around the pillar. You have this lovely lady running towards you from the back end. Okay, great. Next time I do a room like this, we're doing name badges. Okay, thank you.
Good morning. My name is Peg Mlewa. I'm from Zambia. I'm with the Ministry of Agriculture. I just wanted to contribute a bit to the question that was raised by the participant from Uganda in terms of the situation of immigrants. Yeah, I'll give an example of Zambia. We've had that because Zambia is surrounded by 8 countries, and most of them have gone through a period of destabilization, the Congo, Angola, just to mention a few. And I think the starting point to address the issue that you have talked about, the conflicts between the locals and the ones that come in, starts from the policy perspective. I think if you make the policies that are very consultative, includes the local authorities, the chiefs, the chiefdoms, where those migrants are housed, I think it helps to kind of diffuse the conflicts. I think that's what we have done as a government. We've been very consultative in our process of integrating migrants to the point that even in the localities where they stay, for example, in Mahera, you find that those are very productive. They've been given their own portions of land, which they exploit for agriculture purposes, and they contribute a lot in terms of food security. They're able to produce a lot that is even able to, I think, service even beyond the areas where they stay. And even amongst themselves, they come with skills that help to actually lift in terms of productivity and production within the areas that they stay. So we've seen a positive impact from integrating those migrants from other countries which are conflict-ridden.
Solutions, amazing. And I've been to Zambia and I've been to Uganda, and I suggest we do more South-South cooperation. Wonderful. Okay, I hope you're all going on a visit journey to see each other. So let's come back to this very esteemed panel with extremely diverse experiences, and just hear from you, Stanlake, starting on your end, we'll go all the way down. Some of your thoughts, contributions, and proposals based on what I think was the very, very interesting series of questions.
Good. Well, thank you, and thank you also to the audience for raising these various points. I just want to deal with the ones on the refugees, and then give 2 quick examples of some of the things that we've done that also respond to some of the issues that have been raised. I used to be, some years ago, I was the WFP country representative in Uganda. I managed the refugee support operations that we did there. Uganda has a very open approach. In part, that's because many of the leaders in Uganda were refugees themselves. So they've taken an approach that's very welcoming. Colombia is also like that. There are countries in the world that allow refugees, that integrate them into their systems, that allow them to work, to produce, to do the things that citizens can do. And as UN agencies, of course, we encourage this. We also, more than a decade ago, we stopped targeting refugees and specifically, and we always include the host communities. In many situations, the host communities are in sometimes even worse situation than refugees, and it isn't helpful to anybody to single out people because of their status. You need to support people because of the needs that they have, whether they're refugees or they're local people, and that's the way we approach it. I think that is the best approach. Certainly the UN system has moved in that direction. 2 quick examples of things that I really like that we are doing. In El Salvador, we are supporting a lot of young people to become chefs. Actually, we're working with the Ministry of Tourism there, funded by the Inter-American Development Bank and the government, to support people to become, young people to get training as chefs and to then work in local restaurants. The Ministry of Tourism likes this because it increases the appeal of El Salvador restaurants and the communities they're trying to build. Tourism also, it keeps people away from the gangs, which is the big issue in El Salvador. My favorite activity that we do actually occurs in Upper Egypt. This is where we used to distribute, which is the poorest part of Egypt. We distributed food in some of the very rural areas, but then we did an experiment. We also distributed tablets. We gave people, in addition to the food, we would distribute in all of the schools tablets, not iPads, but tablets that people could play on. Actually, what we saw was that the kids came early to school to play with the tablets, to use them just like my kids do. They can spend the whole day on tablets, but the kids, it wasn't the food that was attracting them, it was the tablets. In Egypt, there's connectivity to a national database, so once you're online, you have access to everything. And kids started to develop the technical skills that actually you need to survive in the 21st century. But not only that, we saw that after school, the teachers were using the tablets to improve their teaching skills, so in fact they could move on to better environments. For me, education, digital skills, this is the future. This is what we have to link and integrate in our programs. Thank you.
He's such an optimist. Isn't that impressive after all these years? Okay, so I'm going to come back to you, and I would love to have your input, suggestions, ideas, more questions, but I'm going to cut you off if you talk too long.
Okay, thank you for the nice questions that you have asked. So first of all, I want to answer some of the questions of them. First of all, Akira from here, he asked that about the language barrier and political problem and climate shortage of the refugees. Okay, yes, this is one of the biggest problem in the refugee camp is the language barrier. If I talk about my country, there are a lot of refugees, near about 10 lakhs. So the main problem is they use a language that is called Rakhine language, Rohingya. So there is no written form of this language. So it's only the verbal communication they do. So if you want to learn this, you have no way to write it or no way to learn from this. So you need a translator to understand them. So it's really a big problem to translate their language, and it's possible when you are working with some NGOs or government, you went to them and talked with a translator. But in general, you are communicating with them, it's difficult. So this is the main problem. Another thing is political problem. Yes, the political problem is here. That's why they are the refugees. They are forcibly displaced from their country. So the political problem should be minimized. The international organizations and international body, they should take over the situation, take over to the country they are fled from, to minimize the political problem. And the climate shortage, when we are talking about some developing country, so there are some climate or natural resources shortage. So for that, the problem between the host and the refugees are increasing, because they all are diversing for the same resources or same, same land. So this is the problem. So if we want to overcome this problem, we need to focus on these things. Another question was there from that is the role of international bodies for the refugee camping or something. So yes, there is a lot of things that international bodies can do for the refugees, like they can reduce the violence between the host community and the refugees, and they can take some steps to return back to them to their own country, and they can support supporting for the sustainable development, and they can also uphold some laws, international laws, which can be followed with the host country and the refugees, so that they can live together. And another question was there about policy making and strategies from Abdul. So for me, to answer this question, I have 3 points. One is repatriation, local integration, and resettlement. So if we want to hold the dignity of the refugees, so we need to work together with the host community and the refugees. And the local integration of the refugees allows to live there, to live with their dignity and something. And resettlement is also needed for the for maintaining a good community. And another question was from Josie, is that how you can empower the refugees. So for that, I can say that we need to provide them the basic education and the information about the recent condition where they are living. So that's how we can empower them to work together. So that's all from mine.
Thank you, Mahdi Hassan. This is a revolving panel. You notice we're an open forum, an open platform, and we're so pleased that Mr. Kitare could join us. So we'll let you settle in and listen to some of this discussion, and then you can make your remarks towards the end. If you feel like you should be on stage with the panelists, you're welcome. You know, we don't want to exclude anybody either, but we will wrap up on time because many of you have another session at 11:10 on the spot. So, but just so you know, Mr. Is it Kaitare Shema? Kaitare Shema. Sorry, he's vice president of the cooperative of Kodiga Cooperative. I'm sure he'll share his story with us. But just to wrap up on the questions, and then IUCN has such a unique perspective in this conversation because of the challenges between people, displaced people, and as you mentioned, the biodiversity challenges, which many people really struggle because if you say, you know, a human can't eat, then of course we're going to challenge biodiversity. And you've heard some of the interesting questions about from Madame from the Ministry of Agriculture of Zambia, the policy level, which you referenced as well, and then the forestry. And I used to work a little bit on fisheries. You know, the decay within the oceans as well is something that is invisible, but we see the forest depletion. So anyway, I'm adding questions to your many comments, just so you can comment on some of the questions, and then Bernard, you can wrap us up, and we'll come back to the new panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so my only addition would be also the fact that we can also view, for example, migration, and especially internal migration, as an opportunity. Because sometimes it could be people are moving from one place to another just because of climate-related risks, or, for example, land degradation and so on. So by moving, that could be one of the ways that they are trying to adapt to climate change. So migration can be viewed in dual phase, people trying to adapt, but again, for example, if we talk of integration into the value chains, there are quite a lot of good developments in terms of policies, and as well as global conventions. There are quite a number of new developments that would allow for integration into the local food systems. But I think the issue or the opportunity now is, how do we localize those policies? How do we localize action points that arise out of these conventions? We have some of the burning issues when it comes to, for example, land tenure issues, access to finance, access to risk management products. All these are quite essential if we are to really integrate migrants or refugees into the local food systems. So that would be my quick reflections on that. Yeah.
Can somebody write down his exact words? We want to take global conventions and agreements and localize them and to make them meaningful in the agri-food systems. That is the tweet of the whole session. I hope you got it, huh? Because really, you're so right. We heard from Madam Minister Mariam Al-Mahari that we're moving to the COP28, and she's working really, really hard to integrate this food and agri-systems into the COP28, which is hopefully going to advance the global conventions, and yet we're struggling, as you've all described, to localize them. And that's really the world we're living in. We have to be at both ends of the spectrum. So Bernard, your neighbor just talked about risk management and access to finance. The microphone, he wants the handheld mic on your right-hand side. Yeah, that one, exactly. Smart guy. Okay, Bernard, give us some new insights. How can we manage the risks?
I mean, quickly from my end, I think there was a point on fragility, language, and then in arid places, how do we cope with this? Actually, let's note that the driver of fragility is not just conflict crisis. You know, it goes beyond this. extreme poverty can lead people to move. You see, the weak governance, institutional issues, the competition over natural resources, all those things adding to conflict can bring people to move. So that's one point. And language barrier, actually, usually, when you are in situation, because you do your analysis, you know your bottlenecks and so on. So if this is really a constraining factor, you will include as activity in your project some sort of, language or literacy program, to address this. And I would say basically, it's not also just about production, because you are thinking about, helping people to create micro enterprises in the rural areas. In Niger, for example, where one of our projects was targeting 20,000 people, we managed to address, to support 2,000 internally displaced people and migrants, helping them to create businesses, for example, bakeries. They were purchasing the product, they were sourcing from the farmers, okay? Bakeries, and others were doing handicraft, things like this. So you see, there are other opportunities beyond just the farming. So this is what I would like to add to this. And even when we are talking about value chain, for example, the youth, the Cameroon case I was talking about, it goes beyond production. Some of the youth are, selling inputs. Other, are service providers, going around. When the season is starting, they go around, they sell their services to prepare the farm. They plant the seeds, and then they will come back during harvest. They are using multifunctional, tractors, where they can change the equipment and provide a different type of services, Others were in restaurants, for example, sourcing from other youth, to cook for people. So a very large, area of services within the value chain. Regarding the refugees, I think somebody from Uganda was mentioning that Uganda is having the highest number of refugees in the world. Actually, I relocated in West Africa 2 weeks ago. I was before that in Istanbul, covering Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Uganda is having 1.5 million refugees, but Turkey is having 4 million refugees, Syrian refugees. So Turkey is the biggest country.
It's not a competition you want to win, believe me.
No. Now, you are right. You are right, because sometimes we tend to focus on the refugees, and this creates problems, in the community. We need to adopt a holistic approach, keeping in mind that we want to address local or promote local economic development. So what we do in IFAD, though we target, the migrant, though we target the internally displaced people, we do not lose the point that, it's about local economic development. So usually what we do, we try to revise the project implementation manual to also target those ones. So this is a way to go about it. In Turkey, it was easy because basically there was a shortage of labor in the agricultural sector. So it was very quick, to actually mobilize those ones, for them to support the sector. But in Africa, what we do is to revise those project implementation manual and also target the refugees, also target the IDPs, so that they will also benefit from the opportunities, at the same level as the host population.
In the spirit of inclusivity and appreciation for the diversity of this room, I would like you to thank all of those who have spoken, all those who have asked questions. Wow. Again, this is a knowledge base that's not to be missed. And now we want to hear from the voice of those who've lived it. So I can ask all the panelists except Kitare to return to the audience. And we'll ask Kitare and Shema and an additional panelist who has joined us, Alice, to come sit on this stage here. And we have an interpreter because I'm not sure we're all going to understand Alice's language. So we're very, very fortunate to have the voice of two who have come out of the refugee system and really experienced what we're talking about firsthand. And we hope that you'll share your stories with us and some of your insights. Now, they came late, so they won't have heard all of our wonderful debates and discussions, but I'm sure they know them by heart. And for each of you, I'm going to come sit with you here.
think this is the one that works. Thank you for joining us. I hope you get to come and visit lots of conventions around the world, but we're really pleased that you're both here. My name is Vanessa. We didn't get a chance to meet ahead of time. And this audience is your best friends. The people that have been here really wanting to know and experience how can they help. Both of you are youth. You've lived through so many challenges personally and with those around you. And we would really like to learn from your experience, your suggestions, your ideas, and your recommendations. Now we're towards the end of our session, so we only have 10 minutes. So you can share as much as you can, and each of you gets a couple of minutes to give us your insights and your views, and really what your suggestions are. If we come away from here doing one or two things concretely, what are those one or two things that everyone here can contribute to that will make a difference? So let's start with you, Kitare Shema. Please tell us in your view. You've heard the discussion. Let's kick it off.
Thank you. Greetings to you all. My name is Kaitare Shem. I am a Congolese refugee. I am a married man. I have a wife and 5 children. I am a farmer. Farming I do in our agriculture cooperatives is called Gatsibo Joint Power Cooperatives, Kodiga. This cooperative started in 2022. Since then, I have cultivated 3 content. In these 3, I got the product twice, and once I lost it. But I just didn't give up because the UNHCR staff came close to me many times. That is why I appreciate UNHCR. Now I am out of isolation because I have a place to work. I gained a lot of knowledge from our fellow citizens who stayed with us. I learned a lot from them. The sponsors have trained us on many things. So far, I have knowledge followings: proper planting, soil preparation, proper use of additional product, follow the plant well until they come. Don't plant in the crash, plant one plant as a way to increase the harvest. 5, the best method of harvesting and processing the market well. 6, how we should take care of plant due to weather condition, too sun or too rain. Now I have a different knowledge. I am happy and I have the effort to continue harvesting the agriculture processing profession that aim to improve as well as we have started. Now we take 50% of the production home and sell 70% of the production. I plan to develop myself, develop my family, develop the area I live in, develop the country and the world. In a few words, thank you.
Merci. Thank you very much. We're happy that you've learned and have this agricultural experience. Alice, share your experience with us as well. And Anthony, we can just turn off your mic.
Okay. Just for a few background about them. My name is Kiza, and I'll not go into my other titles, but my relationship with them is because I worked with them in refugee camps in Rwanda, near the border of Congo. So the fact that we're here, I thought I should also come and support them somehow. So this one can speak some English, but not as good. So I know you may be quick to judge, but those are some of the challenges they face while, where they come from. They speak French generally and Swahili, but they still have to deliver here, so you may have to bear with them. For Alice, she doesn't speak any English, so I will try to interpret to her in Kinyarwanda, then she can tell the story, then I'll also interpret it in English. Alice, abangaba baravuga ngo ni abantu ni beza ngo bakwakiriye ngo kandi biteguye kukumviriza ibyo babwira cyane bijyanye n'inkuru yawe aho waturutse impungamizi mwahuye nazo cyane ibijyanye n'intambara ariko icyo bivuze ku bijyanye n'ibyo kurya nk'amwe impunzi so mwatubwira mu kinyarwanda ngewe ndabibabwira mbishyira mu cyongereza kugira babumvirize ubwo nawe wababwira inkuru yawe urakoze.
Ndi impunzi yo mu Rwanda twahunze duturutse muri Congo ahitwa Inyamitabo.
I'm a refugee from Rwanda. I'm a refugee now coming from Rwanda, but I originally come from Congo in a place called Nyabitabo.
Duhunga byari ibintu bikaze cyane binadutunguye kuko twabonaga iwacu ari heza cyane nta n'ikintu kibasha kudukurayo kuko twari abatunzi tworoye inka tunywa amata tukanahinga ibyo kurya byaho ubona nta kibazo tubifiteho ari inshuti abaturanyi tuguwe neza cyane. Ubwo twarakomeje byakunda ko tuhaba turahunga tunyura ikirorirwe ikabati tugeze ikabati bakajya badutangira ngo nidutahe iwacu mu Rwanda ibyo dufite tukigura bakemera tugatambuka. Ubwo nibwo twakomeje tugeze mu ibambiro banga ko tuhava turahatinda cyane bamwe turanatatana barabura kugeza na n'ubu ntibaraboneka.
As you know, when she used to live with her family in DRC Congo before the conflict, yes, there were other conflicts, but not in their own village. But at some point, the conflicts also approached their village, so they had to run away. In so doing, she, collected the few they could have with their family and her kids, rather her family relatives, because she wasn't married by then. Then they ran up to the border of Congo. Of course, on the way, they met the rebels and they took all the things they had carried, all the money. They only were left with clothes they had on until they were received at the border of Congo.
Ubwo twinjiye tunyuze kuri Grande Barriere abanyarwanda baratwakira batubaza amakuru yibanze batujyana muri transit ya Nkamira tumaramwe amezi 6. Tumaze mu amezi 6 batujyana i Nyabiheke na n'ubu niho turi niho nubakiye. Ubwo twarahabaye hashize imyaka 5 narashatse nahageze mfite 23 narashatse ubu ndi umumama ufite abana 3 abahungu 2 n'umukobwa umwe.
They were received at the border of Congo by the government of Rwanda, then handed over to processed by UNHCR. UNHCR took them to a place called Nyabiheke. Before they were in a resettlement processing center, but later they were taken to a refugee camp where they live now. From there, she married. She met her husband, and she was by then 23. She met a husband, and now they have 3 kids, 2 boys and 1 girl. And there, she continues to live with her story.
Ubwo ubuzima bwaho bwabanje kutunanira bitewe n'ibyo kurya byaho tutari tumenyereye buratugora cyane ariko turihangana bitewe n'umutekano waho turi kubona. Ubwo twabayaho tutangira kujya tujya guhinga tugahingira amafaranga kugira ngo turebe ko turi bujye tubona ibyo kurya no kwambara.
From there, they had an issue with food. As refugees, you can understand, probably you may not understand it because probably you've never been refugees, but she said that she had issues with food with her family. They used to try to go to the local community to beg for food. Yes, they were given some little food from NHS, but that wasn't enough. So what they would do, they would go to look for to work as casual laborers for the local community. They would work, dig, and be paid food in return.
Ubwo twakomeje gukora amafaranga gutyo bigereye dukodesha ahantu turi guhinga ibigori tugakuramo nk'ibiro 300. Haza kuza hasere iradufasha cyane iduha amahirwe twishimiye cyane idukodeshereza ubutaka tukayatubuhinga bungana na 5.
Later on, they were able to start working for money, and from that money now they were even able to buy for themselves some food. But later, UNHCR came up with a program which was to rent acres of land, which they could give them parcels for them to start cultivating. And from there, for her currently, she's cultivating 2 pieces of land, where she has, last year she was able to harvest 300 kilograms of grain.
baduha imbuto bakaduha ifumbire tugahinga bakaduha n'imiti yo kubitera ubwo tukaba dusaruramo nk'ibiro bingana na 350 270 tukayijyana mu rugo 270 tukabijyana ku isoko 80 tukabijyana mu rugo bikadufasha mu byo kurya ubwo
with that, 50 minutes dusoze. With that, the harvest would increase based on the fertilizers. UNHCR would organize trainings, but also offer, fertilizers for them to be able to increase on the productivity. And the later year, she was able to harvest 300 kilograms, and some of it she would keep it for home consumption, but most of it, which is 70%, she would sell on the market. So za kuko 50 minutes ebyiri tubivugishuriye.
Ubwo ayo mafaranga adufasha gukemura ibibazo byo mu rugo no kwiteza imbere nkabangira ngo amahirwe yatugezeho ari bishoboka bakaba yageza no ku bandi bose b'impunzi nkatwe. Habasoza ngira nti ndashimira HCR na leta y'u Rwanda yaduhaye ubuhungiro.
As she wraps up her talk, then she said that as refugees, they would definitely appreciate that kind of opportunity and arrangement where they are also included in a community development, but also in inclusion in terms of agriculture. She was able to have an opportunity to have access to land and also involved in production. And she's happy with that. She can no longer go back to street on begging, but rather she also contributes food on the market. And she thinks that it would be really a great idea if all other refugees everywhere, they would have such kind of arrangement where they can be part of the solution rather than be seen as a burden. Thank you so much for her.
Wow, thank you. Wow. Thank you. Murakoze cyane. Murakoze cyane. Merci beaucoup.
That's okay.
You wanted to add something, Anthony?
As you wrap up. He wants to speak something little in Kinyarwanda, something small rather, then so that he can finish it.
Murakoze ndongera gushimira mu by'ukuri abateguye iki gikorwa cyo kugaragaza amarangamutima yacu natwe bakatwibuka nk'impunzi tukagiramo uruhare. Nagiraga ngo mvuge mu ncamake ko iyo koperative tubamo yadufashije nk'uko mugenzi wanjye abivuze. Turashimira HCR kimwe n'abandi baterankunga bita ku mpunzi by'umwihariko. Tunashimira n'iyi leta ya hano yatwakiriye ikatwemerera ko natwe tugira uruhare muri iki kiganiro. Iyo koperative igizwe n'abanyarwanda n'impunzi byadukuye mu bwigunge.
Kamvuge gake ugiye gusoza ko iminota yarangiye. He says that he really thank you, the organizers of this event, that not every day you get to see refugees who are from the camps to come and participate on these high profile events. But with the support of your organizing committee and also the government of Rwanda, they have been facilitated to also come and share their views from their own experiences and their own stories.
Mu by'ukuri tukaba tubifuriza umugisha kandi mu by'ukuri nk'impunzi natwe tutangiye kwigirira icyizere ko natwe turi abantu kimwe n'abandi. Tukaba mu by'ukuri tubashimiye kuko nk'uko twabivuze leta y'u Rwanda yaduhuje n'abanyarwanda iduhuza mu bikorwa bijyaniranye no kwiteza imbere mu buhinzi. Rero mu by'ukuri turabashimira kandi turashimira n'iyi leta yatwakiriye aho igikorwa kiri kubera. Tubifuriza umugisha. Murakoze.
He wraps up by saying that the government of Rwanda welcomed them from Congo. As you may know, Congo has been involved in conflicts for decades and decades. But for him being a refugee, that did not mean that he could not be part of the local, integrated. They were integrated within the local community, and they coexist, peacefully, and they also engage with each other in agriculture. And so they produce. They even have an association called a cooperative where they all gather ideas, engage in training. then they also contribute on the local market with the produce they have, and so they thank you for really an opportunity to recognize them and be able to listen to them. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Murakoze Chane. Next year we'll be in Kigali, and we hope to see you again and learn how your ariko are doing and all the food you're growing. Thank you so much, Murakoze. I hope you're all going to join us next year in Kigali. We just learned this morning that that's the plan. And, you know, it's true that many countries are suffering from continuous change, continuous organization, restructuring, and this productivity discussion about going from working as casual labor, and you were asking the question, to being your own, in control of your own food security is really fundamental livelihoods. We talk about food sovereignty. So Zlatan Milislik, I don't know if I can pronounce it, you're going to fix the pronunciation for me, is resident coordinator for the United Nations here in Tanzania. Clearly has so much experience and has heard these discussions, patiently waiting. We really want to learn from your own experience. You can answer any of the questions, you can throw out your speech, you can read it as is, and challenge us as we look forward. We appreciate any insights, because everybody here, I think, is action-oriented. Thank you so much.
Distinguished panelists, young people, and including those who are young at heart.
Thank you.
Food system stakeholders, agro officials, my UN colleagues, our friends refugees, and friends of refugees, invited guests, good morning, bonjour, habari za asubuhi, salam alaikum. My name is Zlatan Milicic, and I'm the UN resident coordinator here in Tanzania. And I work with a team of 24 agencies, organizations of the UN system in implementing our United Nations Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework, where we also have the World Bank and other international financial organizations being signatory and being part of our joint work. The important thing I want to say about our work in Tanzania, which is very relevant to this context, is that within our cooperation framework, we include and encompass the refugee operations in the Northwest, together with all the other program activities in Tanzania for people of Tanzania. So we're trying to see this holistically and try to complement and actually do things for the benefit of the broader communities, not to select, pick and choose. I'm going to try to make this interesting for you, but I think we all here in the room, and of course our panelists have given us some excellent insights, but I think we all here in the room should remember these last two testimonies as the main things we've heard today. And I was so happy really to hear our friends speaking earlier. I'm really delighted to have joined this enlightening session, which highlights the crucial role that young refugees, migrants, and displaced people can play in our food systems, especially in fragile contexts. At the end of 2022, a staggering 104 million people were forcibly displaced worldwide due to persecution, conflict, violence, and human rights violations. This included 35 million refugees and 63 million internally displaced people. Additionally, that same year we have witnessed 280 million international migrants. Together, this ends up to 400 million people, girls, boys, men, and women, each with their stories, with their dreams, and also with their potential. Many of these individuals, driven by hope and resilience, have found their place in our food systems, from sowing the seeds to serving or cooking meals. Yet, in their journey, they grapple with immense challenges, including poverty, malnutrition, and sometimes deprivation of fundamental rights. The Sustainable Development Goals, at their very core, emphasize the principle of leaving no one behind. As the United Nations, we hold this commitment at the highest regard. Refugees, displaced people, migrants stand among those most marginalized in our society. Their plight underscores our collective responsibility, and our approach should not just be aid, but also empowerment. It is imperative that we change this prevailing narrative surrounding these populations. They are not mere statistics or faceless masses. They are individuals just like each one of us. The circumstances that they have faced may be dire, but their potential remains vast. The young among them especially, with their adaptability, innovation, and enthusiasm, can help bring transformative changes to our food systems. Today's panelist discussions and the testimonies we just heard have brought forward compelling narratives of how, when given opportunity, young refugees, migrants, displaced people have not just contributed to, but also enhanced our food systems. This is also testament to the boundless potential that largely remains untapped. In recent years, our region, including Tanzania, has been facing major challenges due to various factors, including COVID-19, climate crisis, the effects of the war in Ukraine. They all impacted on our food systems. Displacement increased by 5 million refugees, 9 million internally displaced. COVID disrupted mobility, affecting livelihoods tied to food systems. Economic losses, lockdowns, inflation, and supply chain issues worsened food insecurity, and again, particularly for vulnerable groups. Addressing these challenges remains humanitarian action, but also a development approach. And we must recognize the critical role of food systems. It's important that people can get the help that they need during crisis. To address food security within countries and within regions, we need to recognize also the role of remittances, the importance of adapting migration rules for essential workers in food production and supply chain, promoting gender and youth-sensitive responses, and improving data collection and coordination amongst various stakeholders. UN agencies in Tanzania and across the region have been working together with many partners and stakeholders to help create resilient, sustainable, and climate-smart agro-food systems with durable solutions for refugees and displaced people, focusing on gender inclusivity and equality. Young refugees and migrants can play a transformative role in food systems and rural development if they are adequately supported to increase their knowledge, skills, and overall capacity, and if given the opportunity. In Rwanda, we've just heard, we have inspiring examples of joint programs supported by UNHCR, WFP, FAO, the government of Rwanda, private sector partners. An agricultural project has successfully brought together refugees and members of host community. This initiative aims to create a strong evidence base on how to enhance self-reliance, focusing on livelihoods and economic inclusion within a comprehensive whole-of-community approach. In Uganda, FAO, and in collaboration with UNHCR and government of Uganda and private sector, has been working to promote self-reliance of refugees and host communities. These involve building the capacities of refugees and host community members to engage in market-oriented, sustainable production and agribusiness, to develop profitable and sustainable value chains, and to provide scalable energy solutions for cooking, and to support agricultural livelihoods and to diversify their income. Closer to home here in Tanzania, an area-based United Nations joint program, which involves 17 UN organizations, is supporting the building of climate resilience agri-food systems in the Kigoma region, and which hosts 250,000 refugees. Refugees are supported to establish kitchen gardens and grow nutritious food to complement food rations in the camps. And they also acquire skills that can often help them rebuild their lives when they come back home to their countries of origin. Esteemed colleagues, friends, partners present today, your roles are pivotal. Your advocacy, your efforts, and your commitment can shape a future where these young women and men are not just seen as beneficiaries, but as contributors. The inclusion of young people in agri-food business and systems is not merely an act of support. It is a strategic initiative that amplifies our journey towards sustainability. Our collective aspirations, embodied in Sustainable Development Goals and the African Union Agenda 2063, call for us to recognize that sustainable food systems are integral to achieving broader development goals. Harnessing the potential of our youth, including those displaced, migrating, or seeking refuge, should be the cornerstone of this vision. Together, let us chart a path where everyone is a stakeholder in sustainable, inclusive, and prosperous food systems for Africa. Thank you very much.